You run, not with your legs but with your heart, chasing someone who barely turns their head to notice. There is a phase in life where a person becomes consumed by the exhausting pursuit of connection. It is not simply about love or friendship. It is about the desperate attempt to prove one's worth in the eyes of another. You become the one who always reaches out first, the one who never lets the conversation die, the one who replies within seconds, even when your own life is unraveling. The silence of the other person terrifies you, so you fill it with words, messages, and gestures, hoping that if you give enough, you will finally be seen as enough. At first, it feels noble. You tell yourself that effort is proof of care, that consistency is proof of love. You find pride in being the one who never gives up, the one who shows loyalty when others would have walked away. But deep inside, beneath the surface of all this striving, grows an invisible wound. Each unanswered text is a tiny cut. Each delayed response feels like a confirmation of your lesser value. You wonder why you always feel like the guest at someone else's table, never the host in your own home. The exhausting pursuit is not loud. It does not scream for help. It shows up in subtle ways. The way you stare at your phone waiting for a reply. The way you rehearse what you'll say to avoid sounding too much. The way you scroll back through conversations, searching for moments that prove they once cared. It is the heavy sigh after sending another message into the void, hoping this time they will notice. This time they will appreciate. This time they will reciprocate. But they rarely do. Instead, your generosity is consumed like air, taken in without gratitude, invisible, unnoticed. They grow comfortable with your availability, as if your presence is a given, as if you exist to orbit around their world. And yet you continue. You keep running, believing that if you just hold on a little longer, they will finally see you. The pursuit becomes your identity. You measure your worth by their responses, your mood dictated by their attention. When they answer warmly, you feel alive. When they withdraw, you collapse into doubt. The cycle repeats until you no longer know if you are chasing them or if you are simply running away from the fear of being left alone. This phase is not unique. It is a chapter that many know but few admit. We live in a culture that glorifies persistence, that praises the one who fights for love. And yes, effort is beautiful, but only when it is mutual. When effort flows in one direction, it ceases to be love and becomes a performance, a desperate plea for validation. There comes a point when you realize that your pursuit has turned into self-betrayal. You have silenced your needs just to amplify theirs. You have confused availability with value, and you begin to see the cost. Exhaustion, insecurity, a hollow version of yourself staring back in the mirror. This is the exhausting pursuit, the beginning of a story that is both painful and necessary. For without it, you would never recognize the weight of silence nor the power of letting go. You must first feel the ache of being unseen to understand the relief of returning to yourself. So pause here. Ask yourself, who are you when you are not chasing? Who are you when you stop begging to be chosen? Because the truth is, worth is not something you earn by running after someone else. It is something you reclaim when you finally stand still. There is always a moment when effort begins to feel heavier than hope. It does not arrive suddenly with fireworks or some dramatic ending. Instead, it creeps in quietly, like a shadow stretching across the room at sunset. You begin to notice the imbalance, not because the other person announces it, but because your own body grows tired of carrying what was never meant for one pair of shoulders. It starts with the small things. Messages you send that go unanswered for hours, sometimes days. When they do respond, it is with fragments, one-word replies that drain the warmth from the conversation. You write entire paragraphs, pouring thought and care into your words, only to receive a single okay or sure in return. Over time, the silence between their replies grows longer, while your responses remain instant. You wait, they delay. You give, they withhold. And in this pattern, a quiet truth begins to emerge. You are not being valued, you are being tolerated. At first, you rationalize it. Maybe they are busy, maybe they are tired, maybe their love simply looks different. You invent excuses to soften the sting, telling yourself that devotion requires patience. But deep down, your intuition whispers a different story. It tells you that love does not make you feel small, that connection should not feel like begging for scraps. You silence this voice for as long as you can, because to admit it would mean facing the truth that all your effort may have been misplaced. Then comes the moment you can no longer deny it. You notice how often you are the one initiating, how rarely they ask about your day, how easily they dismiss your presence. Their indifference is no longer subtle. It is loud, almost deafening. And with every act of neglect, a strange shift occurs. You expect less from them, not because you have accepted them, but because you have begun to detach without realizing it. This detachment is not born from bitterness. It begins as exhaustion. You grow weary of holding conversations alone, weary of planning meetings that get postponed, weary of giving energy to someone who seems unmoved by your presence. You realize that you are watering a plant that has no intention of growing, and the more you pour, the more you drain yourself. The turning point is not when they finally push you away. It is when you stop running toward them. It is not a grand declaration or a storm of anger. It is quiet, almost invisible. One day you simply stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop rehearsing what to say. You stop expecting the response that never comes. In that pause, the truth becomes clear. The person you are chasing is not the one who will give you peace. What hurts most is not their absence, but the realization of how much of yourself you have given away in the process. You see how many times you silenced your own needs just to keep the connection alive. You remember the energy you poured into proving your worth, when all along your worth never required proof. It was there, whole and complete, even when they refused to see it. This realization does not come with joy. At first it feels like grief. You grieve the dream you held onto, the vision of what you thought the relationship could be. You grieve the version of yourself who believed that if you tried hard enough, you would finally be chosen. The grief is real, but within it lies something even more important: awakening. For the first time, you begin to see the difference between love and attachment, between effort and desperation. You understand that what you mistook for devotion was often fear, the fear of being left behind, the fear of facing yourself in solitude. And when you see this clearly, you begin to reclaim your power. The turning point is not the end of the story. It is the moment when the story changes direction. It is the subtle shift from chasing another person to confronting yourself. It is the pause before a new beginning. And though it feels heavy, it is the first true step toward freedom. After the turning point comes a strange and unfamiliar quiet. At first it feels unsettling, like stepping into a room where the music has suddenly stopped. You are used to the noise of pursuit, the constant buzzing of thoughts, the restless urge to check your phone, the rehearsed words waiting to be sent. But when the pursuit ends, silence takes its place. And that silence feels almost unbearable in the beginning. Yet there is something different about this silence. It is not the silence of neglect, nor the silence of being ignored. It is the silence you choose. It is deliberate, intentional. And because it is yours, it begins to feel like power. Stillness does not mean passivity. It is not an act of surrender or defeat. Stillness is restraint, the discipline to stop running, stop explaining, stop proving. It is the courage to let silence speak where words no longer serve. This kind of quietness is not empty. It is full, heavy with meaning. It forces both you and the other person to confront truths that can no longer be disguised by endless conversation. For them, your stillness becomes unsettling. They were accustomed to your constant presence, the quick replies, the eager questions, the persistent care. Your withdrawal is not announced with anger or explanation. It simply arrives. And in that arrival, they begin to feel the weight of what they once dismissed. They are left to face the echo of their own choices, the emptiness created not by your absence, but by their lack of reciprocity. For you, stillness is a mirror. It reveals the exhaustion you ignored, the boundaries you crossed against yourself, the dignity you once compromised. In the absence of distraction, you see clearly how much you were carrying. And in that seeing, you begin to heal. The Stoics understood this kind of power well. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." The world outside is noisy, filled with demands and desires that pull you in every direction. But within you, there is a sanctuary untouched by the chaos of others. To retreat into that space is not to run away, but to return to yourself. Stillness is not the absence of action, it is disciplined action. To hold your silence when every nerve wants to explain. To remain calm when every impulse wants to shout. To withdraw not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. It is an active choice, a practice in strength. There is a quiet dignity in no longer chasing. You begin to discover that your presence does not need to be announced or proven. It simply is. Those who are meant to value it will feel its weight, and those who do not are no longer your concern. In this way, silence is not weakness, it is sovereignty. It marks the moment when you reclaim the energy you once gave away so freely. Stillness also teaches patience. You learn that not every moment requires a reaction. Not every slight requires correction. Not every absence requires filling. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. To sit in silence and let the world adjust around you. At first, this practice feels foreign. Your old habits call out to you, tempting you to send that one last message, to reopen the door, to explain yourself just a little more. But the more you resist, the stronger you become. Stillness is like a muscle, difficult to hold in the beginning, but empowering the longer you sustain it. And as the silence grows, you notice something remarkable. The noise within you begins to settle. The questions that once spun endlessly, why don't they respond? Why am I not enough? Lose their power. In their place, new questions emerge. What do I need? What do I want? Who am I when I am not defined by them? These questions do not wound. They guide. They shift your attention from the unreachable to the attainable, from chasing someone else to rediscovering yourself. This is the true power of stillness. It is not a punishment for the other person, nor a strategy to lure them back. It is a sacred space you create for yourself, a retreat where you no longer beg for worth, but recognize it as your birthright. It is in this stillness that you begin to gather strength for the next step. Detachment, not as rejection, but as liberation. When you step into stillness, the silence you hold is not just felt by you, it begins to echo in the lives of those around you. The person who once grew accustomed to your constant presence is suddenly faced with a void. The messages that once arrived without fail no longer come. The reassurance they quietly depended on is no longer offered. And what is left behind is not relief, but discomfort. Your silence becomes a mirror. In it they see themselves, without the cushioning of your constant effort. Every moment of your absence reflects back the reality they created. The lack of conversation, the one-word replies, the indifference they showed, all of it now stands before them in stark clarity. They are forced to confront the weight of what they dismissed. At first, they may not understand it. They might assume you are simply busy, distracted or occupied with something else. But as the quiet stretches on, unease creeps in. Questions arise in their mind. Why aren't they reaching out? Why does the phone stay silent? Why do I feel the absence so strongly, when I once took it for granted? This is the power of silence. It does not accuse, it does not demand, but it unsettles. It exposes what words could never explain. You are not doing this to punish them. True stillness is never about revenge. You are not withholding to create anxiety in their heart. You are simply stepping back to honor your own. Yet in that retreat, their own conscience begins to stir. They are left to sit with themselves, and in that space, they cannot avoid the truth of how lightly they treated what was heavy for you. This is why silence is often harder for others than for the one who chooses it. When you were always available, they never had to face their own emptiness. Your energy filled their gaps. Your attention covered their neglect. But when you withdraw, they are left alone with what they have been avoiding. The mirror of your absence reveals the hollowness within them. The Stoics would not be surprised by this dynamic. They understood that silence, when grounded in discipline, is a form of teaching. Epictetus often reminded his students that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the judgments they form about them. Your silence does not harm them. It simply awakens their own judgments. If they feel haunted, it is because they now see clearly what they failed to appreciate. For you, this stage is not about satisfaction or vindication. It is tempting to think, now they finally realize what I was worth. But the true lesson is deeper. Their reflection is no longer your responsibility. Their discomfort is theirs to carry, not yours to resolve. What matters is that you are no longer bending yourself to fill their void. You are learning to let them sit with the consequences of their choices. This is the uncomfortable mirror, a reflection created not by words, but by silence. A mirror that forces both of you to face the truth. Yours about your worth, theirs about their neglect. It is not an easy chapter, for it stirs guilt, regret, and longing. Yet it is necessary, because without it the silence you hold would not have its full meaning. And as this mirror does its work, something inside you begins to shift again. You realize that you do not need their recognition to confirm your value. You do not need their discomfort to prove your silence has weight. What you needed all along was space. The space to stop running, the space to see clearly, the space to breathe. The silence that once felt heavy now becomes lighter. What once seemed like loss begins to resemble freedom. For the first time, you understand that you are not defined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself. And in that realization, the stage is set for the next step. Detachment. Not a cold withdrawal, but a warm reclaiming of the dignity you had forgotten was yours. It is at this point, when silence has already begun to gnaw at the other person, when the weight of their own words returns to them, that the temptation for revenge appears. The ego, still bruised, whispers its case. Why stop here? They deserve to be crushed. Don't just hold your silence. Use it as a weapon. Make them suffer for what they did to you. The desire is natural. No one who has been wronged is free from it. To imagine the other person humiliated, exposed, stripped of their armor, it feels like justice. And yet if you follow this impulse, the trap is reset. Revenge chains you to the very person you want to escape. Every scheme, every retaliation, every pointed remark keeps you orbiting around them, never free, always burning the same energy. Detachment, on the other hand, feels almost anticlimactic. It does not roar. It does not punish. It does not win applause. It simply releases. You stop rehearsing comebacks in your mind. You stop anticipating their downfall. You stop needing their recognition of your strength. Instead, you walk away with your dignity intact, not because they are unworthy of your revenge, but because you are unworthy of wasting your own time. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote often about this very fork in the road. He reminded himself, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. This was not weakness. It was sovereignty. If someone injures you through cruelty, arrogance, or betrayal, and you respond in kind, then you have become a mirror image of what you claim to despise. But if you respond with composure, if you rise above, then you break the pattern. You create space between their actions and your essence. Think of two fires meeting. If you strike back with fury, your flame collides with theirs, and together you create only smoke, choking everyone nearby. But if you withhold, if you refuse to ignite, their fire will eventually burn out against the damp air of your calm. It will sputter, weaken, and die, not because you fought harder, but because you denied it oxygen. Detachment does not mean indifference to justice. It means discerning between what belongs to you and what does not. You may seek fairness through proper channels, you may set boundaries, you may speak truth when necessary, but you do so without venom. Revenge seeks to wound. Detachment seeks to protect. One keeps you entangled. The other makes you untouchable. And here is the paradox. Often the deepest form of revenge is precisely detachment. For nothing unsettles the one who sought to harm you, more than realizing they no longer matter in your world. When your joy, your time, your attention are withdrawn from them, they are left with only themselves. No spectacle, no duel, no audience. Just the silence of their own company, in which they must confront what they tried to escape by lashing out at you in the first place. In this way, detachment is not weakness, but the highest form of strength. To restrain your hand, to unclench your jaw, to allow the storm to pass without answering it with another storm, that is power. It is the discipline of refusing to become what hurt you. It is Marcus Aurelius's wisdom alive in modern form, a refusal to descend, a refusal to mirror, a refusal to live small when dignity calls you to live vast. And once you see this clearly, a shift happens. You stop asking, how can I make them pay? And begin asking, how can I free myself from them entirely? The answer always is to let go. Once you let go of revenge, something unexpected happens. Silence ceases to be a strategy and begins to reveal itself as a form of power. Not the kind of power that dominates or intimidates, but the quiet, unshakable force that makes others lean in without you asking them to. Stillness has always unsettled the restless. To sit without explaining, without defending, without scrambling to prove your worth. This is to remove yourself from the frantic economy of attention where most people live. While they bargain in noise, you trade in absence. While they rush to fill the air, you remain untouched, and in that refusal your presence grows heavier. This stillness is not passivity. It is not weakness or surrender. It is the discipline of choosing when to move and when to remain unmoved. The tree does not panic in the wind. It bends where it must, but its roots do not shift. The ocean does not apologize for its calm surface, nor does it rage because a storm above tries to disturb it. In stillness, you become like these forces, anchored, vast, undeniable. Marcus Aurelius practiced this in his own life, surrounded as he was by betrayals, political schemes, and the endless petitions of those who wanted his favor. He could have shouted. He could have silenced others with the brute force of an emperor's command. Yet he wrote instead about the virtue of waiting, of listening, of guarding one's own inner citadel. Be like the rock, he reminded himself, against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. To embody stillness is to become that rock. It is not that the waves stop striking. It is that their force no longer decides who you are. People may insult you, dismiss you, challenge you, provoke you, and yet in stillness you do not answer with equal noise. You do not chase them into the chaos they want you to inhabit. Instead, you let them crash and scatter while you remain. There is a strange gravity to this. When you are still, others begin to reveal themselves. The impatient will grow louder, trying to shake you into reaction. The insecure will retreat, unnerved by what they cannot control. The wise, however, will notice your calm and adjust themselves to it, as if your silence set the true rhythm of the encounter. In this way, stillness is not withdrawal from power. It is the deepest expression of it, and yet it demands courage. For to be still is to trust that dignity does not need display. It is to believe that truth does not need to shout to be real. It is to understand that time, not fury, will settle the scales. Few are willing to rest in this patience. Most break, lunging for the noisy satisfaction of proving themselves. But those who can remain, those who can anchor themselves in quiet strength, become immovable in a world addicted to motion. They carry within them a calm that no insult can penetrate, a dignity that no storm can drown. This is the beginning of a new kind of sovereignty, the rule not over others, but over yourself. And it is from this rule that all other forms of freedom flow. Stillness is powerful, but left undefined, it risks being mistaken for indifference. To anchor that calm into daily life, you must shape it with boundaries. These boundaries are not walls built in anger, but lines drawn in clarity. They say, "This is where I end and where your demands, noise, or carelessness can no longer reach me." A boundary is not a punishment, it is a declaration of value. You do not slam the door. You simply choose which doors remain open and which must stay closed. When your silence matures into stillness, the next natural step is learning to decide what you will and will not allow to disturb it. In practice, this discipline begins in small ways. You do not answer every message immediately, not because you wish to provoke, but because your time is not a commodity to be consumed at anyone's whim. You no longer feel compelled to justify every choice, because you recognize that your peace is not up for negotiation. You listen, but you reserve the right not to engage when the conversation drains more than it gives. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus taught that freedom was found not in controlling others, but in mastering your own assent. You cannot stop someone from speaking against you, but you can refuse to let their words take root inside. That refusal, that selective filtering of what enters your soul, is the essence of boundaries. It is a silent but decisive no. In relationships, this discipline changes the balance. Where once you may have chased, explaining yourself, bending, overextending, now you simply stand firm. You do not argue with disrespect. You withdraw from it. You do not beg for attention. You offer your presence where it is reciprocated. The silence that once seemed passive now becomes an active measure of self-respect. And here lies the paradox. When you enforce these limits, you are not closing yourself off from the world. You are opening space for what is true, balanced, and nourishing to enter. Without boundaries, your life is crowded with noise. With them, you make room for harmony. This discipline is not easy. The world often punishes those who quietly refuse to be exploited. People may call you cold, aloof, or arrogant. They may accuse you of being distant when you no longer serve their endless appetites. But if you remain rooted in your stillness, you will see the truth beneath their words. They are not upset with you, but with their loss of control over you. A boundary is love directed inward. It says, "I respect myself enough not to let my soul be used cheaply, and when practiced consistently, it becomes more than defense. It becomes strength. For the person who knows where they stand cannot be moved by guilt, manipulation, or fear. Stillness gives you power. Boundaries give it form. Together they mark the shift from surviving others to living with sovereignty. When boundaries take root, the air around you changes. What once felt like an open door, where anyone could step in, speak, demand, and take without measure, now feels like a threshold guarded by your quiet presence. Others sense it even if you never announce it. The balance they once took for granted begins to tilt. Those accustomed to your endless availability feel the difference first. They notice the pause in your replies, the absence of explanations, the space you now allow before responding. It unsettles them. Where once you chased, now you wait. Where once you poured yourself out, now you choose carefully when to give. They may not understand it at first, but they feel it. The weight of their own behavior returned to them. This is the shift. The person who was once taken for granted becomes the measure by which others must reconsider themselves. Silence that once felt like neglect is now unmistakable evidence of self-respect. Boundaries that once seemed invisible become a mirror, revealing who was giving too little, who was asking too much, and who was never willing to meet you halfway. For some, this mirror is intolerable. They will retreat, blaming your calm for their discomfort. Others will grow louder, desperate to provoke the old version of you, the one who answered every call, excused every slight, and filled every silence with effort. But the more you hold steady, the more obvious the imbalance becomes. And the louder their noise, the more clearly you see it was never love or respect that tied them to you, but convenience. Yet for a few, the shift sparks something else. They begin to notice what they missed while you were overextending yourself. They realize that your presence was not infinite, that your giving had weight, that your effort was the invisible structure holding the bond together. In the quiet, they begin to question themselves. And in that questioning, some rise to meet you where you now stand. The Stoics would not call this manipulation, for it is not. It is simply the law of nature. When you cease to spend yourself cheaply, others must recognize your true worth or lose you entirely. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." By stepping back, by enforcing boundaries, you may be called distant or cold. But in truth, you are no longer bending to illusions. You are letting reality reveal itself. And reality always shifts toward balance. The relationships that survive your silence will be stronger, cleaner, truer. Those that fall away were never meant to endure. Either way, the weight no longer rests on you. This is not the end of connection. It is the rebirth of it. By reclaiming your power through stillness and boundaries, you invite into your life only those who value what you offer, and you do so without demanding, chasing, or proving. The shift in dynamics is not about them losing. It is about you finally standing in the quiet dignity of your own worth. And from this place, every bond that remains becomes a choice, not a chase. When you stop chasing, something remarkable begins to happen. The very energy you once scattered outward, seeking attention, validation, connection, returns home. In its place grows a calm gravity, and from this gravity, the right people and opportunities begin to move toward you. Not because you begged for them, but because clarity attracts clarity. This is the paradox of silence. What you once tried to force through noise comes naturally through restraint. The more you struggle to prove yourself, the more invisible you become. The moment you withdraw from that struggle, your presence takes on a different weight. You are no longer the person chasing to be noticed. You are the one who notices yourself first. And that shift cannot be ignored. It is not manipulation. You are not playing games withholding affection or dangling your worth as bait. Rather, you are aligning with what is real. Noise attracts noise, but quiet strength attracts those who can recognize it. When you no longer pour into one-sided bonds, you leave space for mutual ones to form. When you no longer explain your worth, you draw those who see it without being told. Think of it like the flame of a candle. A frantic wind cannot keep the flame alive, but in still air it glows steadily, drawing warmth seekers naturally to its light. Your calm, your discipline, your silence, these are the steady flame. Those who cannot appreciate it will pass by, but those who understand its value will stay. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this truth in his writings, that nature does not rush, yet everything unfolds as it should. Rivers do not force their flow. yet they carve valleys through stone. Trees do not beg for sunlight, yet they grow steadily toward it. Likewise, when you stand rooted in yourself, what belongs to you will come, not through force, but through alignment. This is the liberation that comes after the shift in dynamics. You no longer live in fear of being abandoned or overlooked, because you are no longer depending on others to define your worth. Your silence, your boundaries, your stillness, they have all prepared you for this, to become the kind of person who is not desperate for connection, but discerning of it. And the truth is simple: desperation repels, dignity attracts. Those who come to you now are drawn not by convenience, but by respect. They meet you where you stand because they want to, not because you chased them there. In this way, silence becomes more than a shield. It becomes a filter, separating the hollow from the genuine, the fleeting from the enduring. You no longer need to wonder who truly values you. Their actions will reveal it. Their presence will remain without you begging. And perhaps most beautifully, natural attraction frees you from the exhausting illusion that you must earn your place in someone's life. You are no longer bargaining for scraps of attention. You are offering your presence as it is, calm, clear, whole. Those who recognize its worth will stay. Those who don't were never meant to. This is not the end of pursuit. It is the beginning of reciprocity. You no longer chase what was never yours. Instead, you stand still, and what is yours finds its way to you. Not every story ends with words. In fact, many never do. Messages go unanswered. Explanations never arrive. People drift away without the courtesy of farewell. And for a long time you may have believed that without their acknowledgement, you could never move forward. That closure was something owed to you, delivered only when they finally admitted what they did or why they left. But the truth is harder and more freeing. Closure does not come from them. It comes from you. To wait for someone else to release you is to remain bound by their absence. It is to give them power even in their silence. The very act of expecting them to define the ending keeps you suspended in the same cycle of reaching, hoping, waiting. But once you accept that silence itself is an answer, that absence is its own message, you begin to reclaim the authority of your own story. Creating your own closure means choosing to stop, searching for explanations that will never satisfy you. It means recognizing that their silence is not a puzzle you must solve, but a boundary you can step beyond. Where once the lack of words left you restless, it now becomes the full stop you refuse to write yourself. The Stoics understood this necessity. Epictetus warned that clinging to what does not belong to you only multiplies suffering. If someone no longer wishes to walk beside you, let them go. If they vanish without explanation, let their absence speak for them. To demand clarity from those unwilling or unable to give it is to argue with reality, and reality will never lose. Your closure, then, becomes a quiet vow. I will not wait for peace to be granted by someone else. I will grant it to myself. You do this not with anger, but with dignity. Not with bitterness, but with calm. You look at the silence they left behind and decide that it will no longer be a wound. It will be a boundary, a lesson, a turning point. In this act, silence transforms once more. No longer is it a tool to mirror, or to create space, or to shift dynamics. Now it becomes the ground upon which you heal. In silence you hear your own voice again, freed from the noise of their absence. In stillness you rediscover that you were never lacking. You were only pouring yourself into places that could not hold you. Closure is not forgetting. It is not pretending the bond never mattered. It is remembering without reopening, honoring without clinging, and walking forward without dragging the weight of unanswered questions behind you. And as you do, you realize something profound. The ending does not diminish your worth. Their silence does not erase your effort. Their absence does not define your presence. You carry forward not as someone abandoned, but as someone who chose to stay true to themselves when others could not. This is the final gift of silence. It does not wait for apologies that may never come. It does not beg for explanations that will never satisfy. It simply closes the chapter with grace and opens space for what is yet to come. Once closure has been chosen, not given but chosen, the silence you once feared becomes a kind of homecoming. No longer a void filled with questions, it now feels like space. Space to breathe, to rest, to hear the rhythm of your own soul without interruption. For so long, your energy flowed outward. You gave, you reached, you tried to prove your worth in the eyes of another. But now, freed from that chase, you turn inward. And what you discover is not emptiness, but presence, your own presence. Returning to yourself is not an act of isolation. It is an act of recognition. You begin to notice the small things again, the quiet rituals of your day, the simple joys that once went unseen while your attention was consumed by someone else's absence. The sound of your footsteps on a morning walk, the steady breath that carries you through the night, the thoughts that arise when you are no longer silencing yourself to make room for theirs. The Stoics believe the soul contains its own refuge, its own citadel. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." To return to yourself is to enter that retreat, to discover that peace is not granted from the outside, but cultivated within. It is the discipline of learning that your worth does not vanish when others fail to see it. This return is not always immediate. At first, there may be echoes of the old ache. Familiar silence may tug at you, trying to reopen the question of why they left, why they ignored, why they took without giving back. But now you answer those echoes differently. You do not chase them. You let them pass like clouds drifting across a steady sky. For you know, the answers lie not in them, but in how you choose to move forward. As you walk this path, the energy once wasted on pursuit becomes fuel for renewal. You read the books you once postponed. You nurture the friendships that never demanded you to beg for presence. You discover corners of yourself that had been neglected while you were busy proving your worth. Slowly, the emptiness that once consumed you becomes filled, not with them, but with you. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to trust yourself again. To trust that your silence is not weakness. To trust that your boundaries are not cruelty. To trust that you are not diminished by what you no longer carry. This is not the story of losing someone else. This is the story of finding yourself, whole, unbroken, and complete, perhaps for the first time in a very long while. Returning to yourself is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new one, a journey no longer defined by the weight of others' absence, but by the strength of your own presence. Silence has traveled with you through every stage of this journey. At first it was painful, an echo of neglect, a reminder of unanswered calls and unreciprocated efforts. Then it became a mirror exposing imbalance. Later, it matured into boundaries, into stillness, into the quiet force that shifted dynamics and revealed truths. And now, at the end of this path, silence stands before you not as absence but as presence, not as loss but as strength. The final message of silence is this: you do not need to fill every gap, chase every answer, or demand every closure. You do not need to prove your worth through noise or sacrifice. Strength is not found in how loudly you fight to be heard, but in how calmly you refuse to be diminished. What once was an exhausting pursuit has transformed into renewal. The energy you once poured outward has been reclaimed. The person who always reached, always chased, always gave too much, has learned the art of restraint. And in that restraint you have discovered abundance. The world will not always understand this. Some will interpret your silence as coldness, your boundaries as arrogance, your stillness as indifference. Let them. Their misunderstanding does not alter your truth. For silence is not about them, it is about you. It is about the dignity of refusing to trade your peace for scraps of attention. It is about the discipline of creating space where your soul can breathe. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think or do, only what you do." That is the essence of this final message. Silence is not surrender, it is sovereignty. It is the choice to govern yourself rather than be governed by the noise of others. And here lies the renewal. When you no longer fear silence, you are free. Free to let go of what does not serve you. Free to allow space for what truly belongs. Free to walk forward without being chained to the absence of someone else. In the end, silence is not empty, it is full. It carries lessons, boundaries, healing, and clarity. It holds the strength you once thought you lacked, and the calm you once searched for in others. The final message is simple, but profound. Silence is not weakness. It is the presence of something deeper, your worth, your dignity, your strength. And when others finally return, if they do, they will find a new version of you. Not bitter, not guarded, but calm, aware and untouchable. In silence, you have not lost. You have found yourself.